Good afternoon and welcome to the latest in a series of GSA Snapshot Webinars. Today we'll be addressing the important questions around the state of private mobile networks and their deployments globally. During these 30-minute snapshot sessions, we dig into different topics of interest that the global mobile ecosystem are really focusing on, drawing on the breadth and depth of GSA research to provide invaluable and unique insights into the current state of 4G and 5G networks, technologies, spectrum and devices globally. First, a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into today's event. We're joined by Joe Barrett, President of GSA, and Luke Pearce from the GSA research team. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions using the Q&A function on the sidebar. Please do pose your questions as we go through the data and insights, and we'll put them to Joe and Luke at the end of the presentation. The data presented today, including the latest GSA report on private mobile networks, will be shared with you immediately following this event. You can also download the presentation at any point during this live event by moving your mouse over the slides and clicking on the little download icon you'll see in the top right of the screen. Today's GSA Snapshot webinar is on private mobile networks, and over the next 30 minutes, the team will address questions such as what defines a private mobile network, the countries leading their adoption, and those that are setting spectrum aside for local private networks, the strength of 5G versus 4G, and the verticals leading the way and the market drivers behind it. But to get things started, I'll first hand over to Joe Barrett, President of GSA, who will share a brief update on GSA's activities.
Thank you, Richard. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see a good number of people online and interested in this topic. Just a little bit about GSA for those that don't know too much, and there's been a lot of changes also over the past few years, past few months, where we've really extended the research that GSA is doing, and it's very much about what's happening in the industry today. So we've been representing the global mobile ecosystem since 1998. We now have 9 major industry executives on the board. MediaTek joined recently. And we are feeding into the extensive database which we call Gambod, where we're developing all our reports out of. Some of those reports are for members only and for associates who subscribe to getting access to our data. So you don't have to be a member, you can still get access to the detail. We've got, I think, probably the largest spectrum group split into 6 regions, and then also India and various project groups, including a group for WRC 23, which is coming up next year. And then a standards a group that is supporting the 3GPP standardization work. And then also now looking into 6G, although it's very, very early for that. It's a long, drawn-out process to get to the 2030 program within ITU. And now have 87 associates, companies with the regulators, operators, other companies, government agencies that want to get access to our data. So that's what we're doing, and obviously providing lots of input. The private mobile network special interest group was set up last year to try and get some benchmark of what's really happening out there in the industry around private mobile networks. We've been producing reports around that recently, and this is picking up on those reports. So the idea is to really define what a private mobile network is and share that out to the industry, including many analysts, which we do on a regular basis. And so without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Luke, who can take you through the latest research.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe, for the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining. My name is Luke Pearce, and I'm here representing the GSA research team as part of our role as GSA's exclusive research provider at CCS Insight. So just a bit of an introduction. So what we'll be showing you today are the latest figures from our GSA Private Mobile Network report. And that's created in association with the special interest group here at the GSA. The figures you are seeing today are actually very fresh, actually. You are some of the first people to see them publicly, as the report is actually going live on the website today with references from the first half of 2022. The Special Interest Group tracks customer references on a quarterly basis. So we're not tracking the individual networks as such, but rather we're tracking it at the customer level. So that's something to bear in mind when showing the numbers later on. We've been tracking the market since Q4 2021, and we're constantly adding additional detail each update as well. So this time around, we've provided time stamping so we can really see how the space has developed over the last decade or so. The goal is really to accurately represent private mobile network traction, both to support the analyst community, as Joe alluded to, as well as promoting further adoption and industry collaboration. The exact number of private mobile networks is it's hard to determine. Details are not often made public. So therefore, by leveraging the group's internal knowledge of references, we really want to make it the kind of most trusted and verifiable source of private mobile network deployments out there. The group was originally set up by Nokia, Huawei and Ericsson, but we're constantly adding new members, and we've included Mavenir earlier in May this year, as well as kind of Keysight Technologies and Private LTE and 5G.com. So just a quick note on definitions before we dive into the figures. So all references collected are 3GPP based. So we're only including those that are based on LTE, 5G or GSMR based private mobile networks. So we're not including those on Wi-Fi, Tetra, P25, WiMAX, Sigfox, LoRa, or any network implementations using network slicing or virtual networking functions on a router. So that's something to bear in mind. We're only collecting one reference per company per country. So what that means is that when there is an organization with multiple networks or deployments across a singular country, that is just counted as one customer reference. We're also looking at commercial contracts worth more than 100,000 euros only. So we're excluding any kind of small demonstrations or free trials, really trying to focus just on those proper private mobile network deployments. We're including both named and anonymous references. So the named ones are those that are public and can be found online through press releases and that kind of thing, whereas the anonymous ones are submitted directly from the PMN group members. So having that makes it a really kind of valuable database that's pretty hard to find anywhere else. So without further ado, let's have a look at some of the numbers. So now we have this time series information, we can really map the customer references over the last decade or so. So it's no surprise to know that private mobile networks are certainly growing and adoption is on the rise, as we can see from that chart there on the right. 2019 was really where things took a big jump, as well as 2020, where the number of references announced more than doubled in 2020. 2021 also grew pretty strongly, so there's been a 101% compound annual growth rate from 2016 to 2021, so very kind of strong growth there. The first half of 2022, we've seen 140 customers added. So although that's a pretty healthy number for the first half, actually, if it continued at the same pace, we're looking to be around the same kind of level as 2021. So the growth does seem to be slowing a little bit, but let's wait until the full year so we can see the full picture of that. So we've counted over 50 different equipment vendors that have been involved in the supply of equipment for private mobile networks based on LTE or 5G. More recently, we've seen lots of efforts to commercialize the availability of pre-integrated solutions from several equipment providers in 2021. So things like managed services and kind of do-it-yourself kind of kits. And they really kind of aim to simplify the adoption of a private mobile network. We've also identified more than 66 different telecom network operators who are each involved in private mobile network projects across their respective countries. And more recently, we've seen cloud providers, often referred to as hyperscalers. They are now also offering private mobile network solutions, usually in partnership with some other operators or network suppliers. It's really their ability to exploit that mass scale cloud infrastructure and their existing presence that is already in those commercial enterprises. And that's really likely to help drive that additional growth in the private mobile network market. And we've seen a recent example of AWS over in the US recently get involved in the private mobile network space. So to date, GSA has been able to categorize 889 different customers deploying private mobile networks located all around the world. So that's really the kind of headline figure, that 889 number. And that's up from 794 in the previous update earlier this year. So we've added around 111 customers in the last quarter. 340 of those are named and 454 are anonymized or non-public in the data. So that's about 58% that can't be found in the public domain. So really kind of showing the true value of this data set. In terms of geography, we're looking at private networks deployed in 70 countries around the world. That's up from 68 last quarter. And that includes, as you can see from the map there, much of North America, Europe and Asia. And where organizations have subsidiaries in different countries or territories deploying their networks, that each subsidiary in that country is counted separately. So yeah, we're definitely increasing that across the global sphere. In terms of spectrum, regulators are showing signs of making increased allocations of dedicated spectrum available for private mobile networks. This really kind of means that spectrum can be acquired directly by organizations instead of by mobile operators, which gives industries that alternative deployment model. As you can see from the figure above, there's typically a strong positive correlation between the number of private mobile network references and those countries with dedicated spectrum, those ones there in green. We've seen it allocated this way in France, in the US with the CBRS band, Germany, the UK as well, and more recently India, which recently stated it would reserve part of its next generation telecom spectrum for private networks. So we've seen it across many countries, and we expect this trend to continue to follow throughout the rest of 2022 and into next year as well. The US currently has the most references at 109, and Germany there is second with 77, so quite a lot in Germany. China, the UK and Japan kind of round out the top 5 in terms of the countries. So it's widely known that China does have lots of private mobile network deployments. We see various numbers being quoted online and in the press, but we believe a large proportion of those networks are leveraging the public network and therefore do not meet our definition or criteria. And that number can sometimes even be hundreds or even thousands. So that's something to note. Something else important to note is that these figures don't include some of the anonymous references where only the region is provided, so as some of the country detail might expose the network, and we find that to be the case, especially with defense contracts. But generally, this chart is certainly reflective of that trend that we see across the different countries. So on to technology, and there is a lot of excitement about 5G's potential in private mobile networks. But it may or may not surprise you to know that LTE still makes up the majority of customer deployments. So we see around 57% of references being LTE only, for now at least. Including those where LTE and 5G is combined, LTE is used in 672 of those catalogued customers deploying private networks. 5G is being deployed in 354, so about 40% of these customers. And although the proportion of 5G deployments is pretty significant at 40%, it must be noted that this number definitely does skew towards more of those long-term expensive trials or deployments within kind of educational or testbed and validation facilities. So there's still quite a limited number running kind of real operation in those industrial situations. In terms of 5G standalone, it is used a bit. We've got 37 deployments using 5G standalone, so it is there, but still quite a small number. GSMR, which is a secure voice and data communication platform specifically for the rail industry, that's being deployed in around 2% of these customers. In terms of the spectrum, and we do detail this further in the actual report, then C-band is kind of really the most popular spectrum allocation for private mobile networks. Band 48 specifically is the second most popular, and that's helped by the US's allocation of CBRS in this range. In terms of high band spectrum and millimeter wave, kind of the real pinnacle of 5G, it is being used in a few deployments. I think around kind of 8 references, but still it's pretty early in the phases, and mostly in still kind of device lab testing and that kind of thing. So it's still quite early on in that adoption curve for high band spectrum. So onto the verticals now. So looking at all the different verticals there on the right, we can see that the manufacturing sector is really the kind of strong adopter of private mobile networks. And we have 165 different identified companies involved in known pilots or deployments. And that's up from 111 at the end of 2021. Again, within the report, we also go a step further and we categorize these manufacturing deployments by subcategory. The leading one of those is actually automotive manufacturing, which has the most customer references. After this, in terms of subcategories, we also have ones that produce machinery and equipment as second, as well as kind of electrical and appliance equipment. Process manufacturing, so things like food and chemicals and metals, they do certainly are present and have a handful, but it is definitely less so in comparison to those kind of that are more kind of electronics and machinery heavy manufacturing. The education sector is the second most common group. We've got 95 customers deploying private mobile networks here. A lot of those are campus networks over in the US, which received some grants over the last couple of years to help promote e-learning. So that can kind of be explained there a little bit as well. But there are also quite a few educational deployments in Europe, particularly in Germany. That's then followed by kind of more heavy duty verticals, things like mining companies and power utility companies. A lot of those are actually based on LTE networks and actually have been in operation for some amount of years already. Defense and peacekeeping, again, another major one, and as is rail, which round out kind of the top 5 verticals. More recently, we've seen an increase of those in the middle, so certainly an uptick in airports, seaports, and logistics and warehousing as well, which have really kind of been showing some strong signs of growth in the more recent future. And when looking at this graphic, again, another caveat, but we should bear in mind that although this data gives an indication of the number of customers deploying private networks, it does not necessarily provide a view of the market value of each segment, nor a total number of networks deployed. So, for example, some market segments, so some in the middle there, like public protection and disaster relief, one customer deployment in our database could technically represent a nationwide network deployment, which could be equivalent in value to many hundreds or even thousands of campus-style private networks. So that's just something to note here as well. With the introduction of timestamping, we can see the development of these verticals over the last near decade. So we can see that early on, public protection, rail, defense, power utilities, mining, these kind of made up the majority of references up to around kind of 2019. Since then, it's quite clear that the growth of education and manufacturing there in the furthest right column in 2022, they are the real references which have been driving the more recent growth. As we alluded to earlier, implementing private networks is becoming slightly more affordable with the new deployment models like as-a-service subscriptions and managed services. So access to the spectrum is also becoming a lot easier too. And that's really, those things are what's driving private mobile network adoption in a larger variety of verticals, particularly those of a smaller scale as well. So just looking at some of those kind of market drivers, there are a variety of factors that are really kind of fueling private mobile network traction. The first of those is that the demand for private networks is really kind of being driven by the spiraling data security, digitization, and enterprise mobility requirements of modern business and government entities. So we're really seeing organizations of all types combining connected systems with big data and analytics to really transform their operations, automation, and efficiency. So with wireless networking, with LTE and 5G, that's really enabling these transformations to take place, particularly where it's really kind of dynamic environment, or if it's quite remote or it needs to be highly secure. That's when wireless networking with mobile really kind of comes into its own, and it's still offering that scale benefit of a technology that's already been deployed worldwide. The second driver, I guess, is more of a technology-based one, and it's the arrival of LTE advanced systems, which have really delivered a step change in network capacity and throughput. 5G as well really have brought kind of improved density and support for a larger number of users and devices. Another benefit for 5G is also the dramatic improvements to latency, which enable the use of mobile technology for those more kind of time-critical applications. So certainly the technology is a huge driving force behind the market. The third one there is that private mobile networks are often part of a broader digital transformation program in an organization. So this includes the introduction of things like cloud networking and other digital technologies such as AI and machine learning and data analytics. More and more applications of the private mobile network will use these capabilities combined with mobile connectivity. And the last one, I guess, is looking at the competing technologies. So there is a large group of potential customers already that currently operate private networks based on technologies such as Tetra or P25, or probably most importantly, Wi-Fi. So many of these customers are demanding critical broadband services that are just simply not available from alternative technologies. So therefore, private mobile networks based on LTE and 5G really could eventually replace much of this market. So some quite significant market drivers pushing this market further on. So just running through some of the key takeaways and key highlights then, 2016 to 21, we really saw the strong growth there with a high compound annual growth rate of 101%. Got that headline figure that we should take away, the 889 customer references across 70 countries. So definitely kind of use that as a point of comparison. We saw the strong positive correlation between liberalized spectrum and private mobile network adoption, with the US, China, and Germany, the top 3 countries for private networks. We saw the importance of LTE, which is used in the majority of networks. 57% are LTE only. So that's a real kind of key takeaway from today. 5G, although it is used in 40% of network references, is still kind of mainly used in those long-term trials and tests, with 5G standalone and millimeter wave, although they're still being used in a small number for the time being. And then we had a look at the verticals as well, looking at manufacturing and education, really kind of driving the market, along with mining, utilities, defense and peacekeeping. Those are really the kind of top 5 sectors by customer references. We saw the automotive industry in particular is driving that forward, as well as some of the machine manufacturing as well. So it's a really exciting and dynamic space, private networks, and it's got a large number of wide range of market participants that are actively engaged in delivering solutions for private networks. So with so much opportunity and so many regulators planning initiatives making spectrum available for private usage, we should expect significant market developments over the next couple of years. And GSA will be providing further statistical updates covering the private mobile network sector later this year and into 23 and beyond as well. So if you do want to kind of find out more about our report, or you want to get your organization involved in shaping the research program, then please get in touch via my email address shown on screen, and we'd be happy to kind of work with you on that. So thank you for listening, and yeah, I guess we're happy to take any questions. I think we've got a few minutes left, haven't we?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Luke. So we've got some questions coming in, so please do submit any questions you have via the chat function, and we'll get through as many as we can. Just a couple of more, I guess, detailed ones on GSMR and reasoning why was that included in the data set?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So yeah, GSMR is, we've included that because it is kind of mostly based on 3GPP tech. And we do see that as a dedicated private network, especially kind of relative to other rail solutions like CSP slices, which kind of leverage the public network a lot more. And a lot of those GSMR networks, we think of the first step really to migrate to LTE-R or even a 5G based system as part of the kind of future railway mobile communication system platform. So we really do think that we should include those because they are pretty very similar to what a dedicated private mobile network.
And do get sort of leads on to the next question, which is how representative is the data?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Again, as mentioned throughout the presentation a few times, it's our kind of unique capability, I guess, of combining both the public and what we can find online, but also the non-public references from our members. And yeah, we're confident that we are capturing the majority of references, but we're always willing to kind of help improve the database and get more organizations on board to really kind of help drive that and make that the most authentic and verifiable source of information. But yeah, we're pretty confident that it is quite representative.
Thank you. And a question on neutral hosts of the private networks being run by the mobile operators. Do we have any data on how many are using a neutral host between the MNO and the private network?
That's not something we do currently capture, but yeah, I mean, we're constantly improving the database and taking on suggestions as to things we could add. Neutral host definitely is relevant, and it's something that we can certainly discuss within the group, and yeah, potentially adding things like that going forward. As you know, it's a pretty dynamic space. There's lots of interesting things happening, and we want to make sure that this data set is relevant and continuing to kind of reflect what's happening in the market. So although not at the moment, that is something that we could definitely think of, and I'll make a note to take that back to the group.
Good stuff. We've got just a specific question about slide 8. So I'll go back to slide 8. So that's what I'm asking. The numbers in the blue bars, countries without dedicated spectrum for industry. What does that mean? Is that a private network built over a leased spectrum or public mobile operator?
Usually that's kind of the ones that are public. So those that are green is that you know, the spectrum regulator has allowed the enterprises or organizations to bid for that and acquire that spectrum directly. So those in blue are generally those markets that are controlled pretty much by the mobile network, public mobile network operators. So that is, you know, the deployment case in many markets in the world. The green stuff is kind of more recent, where things like CBRS and places where that spectrum is now becoming more liberalized and available to a greater number of participants. So yeah, those blue ones are where it's predominantly controlled by the mobile network operators, and in order to implement a private mobile network, you kind of have to go through the operator at this stage, which is, you know, still a valid route to market for sure.
Excellent. And something on the spectrum allocations. Again, is future spectrum allocation across the globe something that's will be dedicated to private networks? Is that captured in the report? So we're looking at future spectrum allocations. For example, do we have any data on what countries like China is planning from a spectrum perspective around mobile?
Yeah, I would say that information is more widely available within the GSA. You know, we do capture a lot of information in terms of the spectrum. We have the spectrum database on Gambod, in which we have we show all the spectrum across many different countries in terms of which bits of spectrum are allocated to which operators and for what usage as well. So we do have that information. It's not, I wouldn't say technically in the report as much, or in this private mobile network space generally, but within Gambod and the wider GSA space, subscribers can get access to that and can look in each market to see how that spectrum has been allocated, and see even those that are kind of considering options on which kind of frequencies are being used. So yes, in a short answer to that question, we do have it within the wider GSA portfolio.
Excellent stuff. And you mentioned hyperscalers. Again, do we have any data specifically on hyperscalers and how many networks being deployed by then, or again, is that a level of detail that we haven't broken out?
Yes, again, it's a little bit of detail we haven't broken out. You know, generally we're not necessarily publishing which kind of operators and equipment providers are on each network, so we don't necessarily publish that information at the moment. But we certainly know that hyperscalers are actively involved in this market and are picking up those deployments where they are publicized and through our research. So yeah, we're definitely including those networks that the hyperscalers are setting up and operating, but that segmentation isn't yet available within the database.
Excellent. Having asked people to submit questions and now coming thick and fast, and I can't read them quick enough. But so I guess talking a little bit about some of the recent examples of private mobile networks, could you give some examples of some of the sort of more recent examples that you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned, you know, there are a lot of kind of airports and seaports and logistics are certainly ones we've picked up. I would say the Frankfurt airport, which is, I think it's Europe's largest private 5G network. That launched it in Frankfurt with, I think, NTT as the operator fairly recently. So I think that's quite a key example. You know, that it's really kind of very, very large network, that one. We've also seen lots of, we mentioned automotive, BMW, they have a new one in Germany. I think that's actually their second one in Germany. And they've also got one or two in China as well. So BMW and some of those automotive manufacturers are really quite advanced in their private mobile network journey. I've also seen Samsung launching a few in South Korea recently, things with kind of Naver robots and kind of more futuristic elements, as well as kind of a few hospitals in South Korea as well. So yeah, it is really broad, and it's picking up, and it's really across many countries and networks. And there are certainly organizations which are at different levels in terms of their adoption. But yeah, that's kind of how we see it at the moment.
So to say, conscious of time, so maybe just the last couple of questions. You mentioned sort of different value sizes. Is there a typical average value attached towards a large scale deployment or a smaller scale deployment, sort of quantities, sizes? How do you measure value?
Yeah, I mean, typically, we are classing deployments that are over 100,000. Generally, we find that this is actually the majority of networks. So other than kind of free trials or small deployments, it's most networks generally are over 100,000. So we're talking kind of six figures, and if you kind of want to deploy a private mobile network. So it's, although the cost is changing a bit with new competitors in the market, it is still generally quite an expensive thing to set up. So generally, we're talking kind of six figures really to implement a private mobile network. And even some of those larger ones, particularly in kind of mining or those over a very large scale, those are generally can even hit the kind of millions. And so we're talking kind of one to two, a kind of single digit million for kind of those much larger networks. So it is quite variable, but it is it is a huge commitment, and it's usually part of that broader digital transformation program for kind of many enterprises. So it's not cheap, not yet, but it is certainly showing its value, I think, for the market. And yeah, that kind of return on investment is increasing, definitely.
Fantastic. And the last one, we should look at, I guess, mobile operators. How do you see the number of mobile operators doing private mobile networks? Is that growing? And then a subset of that, just going to ask it, what does it mean when a mobile operator deploys a private network? Isn't this an oxymoron?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So yeah, in terms of the first bit of that question, in terms of the number, yeah, we've got more than 66. So probably in most major markets, there is a mobile operator who is kind of has a private mobile network as part of their portfolio. And certainly mobile operators do see this as a kind of real growth potential within their portfolio. That ability to offer, a part of that network, particularly with network slicing, but something that they own, typically mobile operators, this is their business, I guess, talking about, owning that spectrum, setting up these kind of mini networks here for these enterprises. So yeah, we've certainly seen that number increase across the world, and we're up to 66 mobile operators at the moment. But yeah, in terms of what that means, yeah, of course, there are various deployment models from the mobile operators. They have a kind of a portfolio of different options. Usually there will always be, particularly in those countries where they own the spectrum, they will kind of have to be involved there in kind of loaning out the spectrum to those enterprises. So they'll always be involved in that respect. But they do have the capability to set up these networks, particularly with things like radio planning and base stations. This is what they do normally for public. So they do have quite a lot of expertise here. So they do kind of offer that as part of their portfolio to those enterprises, or they do partner with other equipment providers and other kind of systems integrators as well, in order to kind of help their customers develop that private mobile network. So it's usually quite a collaborative effort from a number of different parties, including the operator.
That is great. Cheers. Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time. We tried to keep these snapshots to 30 minutes to be respectful of people's time. So thank you for your questions. And if we didn't get to them, apologies. We ended up having them coming through thick and fast at the end. So I'd really like to just close this event by saying thank you, and once again for joining us today. After the event, just to recap, you will receive a link to the webinar recording and to the latest Private Mobile Networks report, which is now available for download on gsacom.com. The data you've seen today is taken from GSA's Gambod database. It's sort of this unique and search analysis tool which contains the most up-to-date information on 4G and 5G devices, networks, technologies and spectrum, and an industry resource that's available to all employees of GSA executive and member companies and to GSA associates who subscribe to the Gambod service. If you're interested in that, please do drop us a line on the email address you see there on the screen. The next event is on the 26th of October, and will be a GSA Snapshot event. So similar format, taking a global look at the sunsetting of 2G and 3G networks and the migration to 4G and 5G. For the latest updates on all GSA research activities and upcoming events, please do follow the GSA on our social channels. You'll find the Global Mobile Supply Association on Twitter, LinkedIn, WeChat and Weibo. And if you visit gsacom.com, you'll be able to subscribe to our weekly research digest email and new report notifications. So finally, on behalf of Joe, Luke and the GSA team, all that remains for me to say is thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon at future GSA events. Many thanks.